He's laughing. Reverend John Turner. So as you may know, he's our resident minister here at Orange County Buddhist Church, OCBC, and he is also the lead minister with everydaybuddhist.org. And everydaybuddhist.org shares authentic and contemporary Shin Buddhist teachings and practices for everyday life. So Reverend John was a high school athlete, a UCLA mathematician, and a computer programmer who found Buddhism mid-career and changed the course of his life. Reverend John earned a master's degree from the Institute of Buddhist Studies and was ordained as a full-time Shin Buddhist minister at the Nishi Honganji in Kyoto, Japan. So I would like to introduce Reverend John, and for you to please share your wisdom and philosophy of yoga and Buddhism with us. And I always enjoy Reverend John's contagious passion and his wonderful sense of humor. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was talking to a minister the other day, and he told me I was too enthusiastic. Like I need to dial it down a little bit. And he goes, you know, enthusiasm's good, but there's also poignancy, and, you know, I just can't help it. Buddhism to me is just such a wonderful thing, and it changed my life, and I'm very enthusiastic about it. So I wanted to talk today from the Buddhist side of the house about how much yoga has helped me appreciate Buddhism. You know, we live in a Protestant country. It doesn't really matter what your religion is, but that's kind of our cultural background. And we tend to focus on doctrine and beliefs. And we're not big on ritual. We don't like to do things that we can't explain or we don't understand. And so in the beginning of my practice of Buddhism, I was like that. I thought, well, I'll just trade in the 10 Commandments for the Eightfold Path and we're good to go. But it didn't work. And I kept struggling trying to understand. I read lots of books. I was a nightstand Buddhist, and I was really into texts. And when at PDS, one of my instructors, Dr. Lisa Grumbaugh, said there were two things were going to happen to me. One of two things. Either Buddhism, I was going to learn to have Buddhism touch my heart, emotionally and physically, or she said, you're going to drop out. So I was like, wow, that's kind of, I mean, I've just started grad school. It's kind of a harsh sell. So when I started to practice yoga with my wife, maybe 15, 20 years ago, I began to appreciate the importance of sound, like all this chanting that Bob did. Namo Amida Butsu is part of this lineage of sound, of vibration, of connecting the body. And that's another major aspect of Buddhism. It's not a mental thing. Like, I know we do this in the West, but we like to rush people into the hospital and do studies and do EKG studies and look at brain waves and prove something we're doing affected the mind. But from a Buddhist point of view, it's the body. It's not located in the mind, but we need scientific proof. And I think Buddhism and yoga, the reason why these practices survived is because they worked, right? It changed people's lives. It changed the way they view the world. And so there's a kind of a sorting or a natural filtering out of things that didn't work. And I read a quote by a Catholic nun. She said that in religion, what happens is the practice comes first and then the doctrine. And I thought, wow. So these things the Buddha did and what they did in yoga worked well. And then it seemed like they were kind of motivated in words to others. So doctrine is kind of a side effect of deep emotional practice. And the other thing I wanted to mention is during the Buddhist time, there was a lot of controversy and a lot of debate going on. I actually have a document here called the Systematical Teachers and Their Teachings. But basically, it's about the main concern of Indians at the Buddhist time was karma and migration. Like, you know, is there good karma? Is there bad karma? Can I even control what I do? How do I know right from wrong? These were big issues. And if I don't get it right, do I come back? Do I not come back? So what the Buddha did, his focus was on interconnectedness and no self. Those are his main teachings. And he would interpret karma and transmigration through the lens of interconnectedness and no self. But what happens is these four teachings come into China at the same time, and they kind of get accepted as the four teachings of Buddha. But he really was focusing on how we're all interconnected and everything is one, and we really don't have a fixed identity. So that's what Buddhism really leans into. And I thought Bob was really accurate in saying that the Buddha really kind of pushed back against the caste system. And religious scholars say Jesus can be thought of as a revolutionary. Buddha was a little different. He didn't try to overthrow the patriarchy, but what he tried to do is give everyone alternatives. So, it's kind of interesting. He was born into the warrior caste. He has to leave home to change his identity. He had to leave that caste system to become a profound spiritual leader. And so he kind of abandons his warrior caste to become a religious leader. And then he also mentioned the Brahmin tradition. The way you worked out your karma was through ritual, and that could only be done by the Brahmins. So most people were cut out. And he also opened up spiritual practice for women. So that was another major event that he really pushed forward on. So I wanted to get started. The first thing I wanted to show you, this is about the first time I heard of Buddhist yoga, this book. It was written by Nami Folik and Rumi Nakatani's father. He was a Nichiren priest, and I was able to go out and get this book on Buddhist yoga. The other thing I did on my iPhone is I typed in, this literally happened about 2 or 3 days ago. Masters it, he's the best there's ever been, but he doesn't have a breakthrough. Masters it, he's the best there's ever been, but he doesn't have a breakthrough. And so he leaves again, he quits this, so he's quit. And so he leaves again, he quits this, so he's quit twice now, and he washes himself, he bathes himself now, and he washes himself, he bathes himself, he begins to practice with strength meditation under a Bodhi tree. He begins to practice with strength meditation under a Bodhi tree. And then another part of the story is a young woman who's gorgeous and single named Sujata brings him sweetened milk. And this is wrong for so many reasons. She's young, she's cute, she's single, and she's got food. So this is really not appropriate at all, but he eats and he gains his strength, and at 35, he realizes enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. And this is the insight into impermanence, interconnectedness, and no permanent self. And he goes on to teach for 45 years. Okay, the history lesson's over. So I wanted to share with you, Bob talked about this as well, is that meditation is a really big thing. It's really large. There's all kinds of different ways of meditating. And the other thing, this is it. In the Buddhist tradition, because he taught for 45 years, we have 500,000 pages of sutras. So, this is like 1,000 of these. And this was written in the Common Era, so much, much later. And that was another thing I wanted to mention about Indian culture. Indian culture is really big on things happening and the order in which things happen, but they don't really care about dates. Like when something happened wasn't that important. So it's very difficult for us to know, as Bob was saying, who came first and when, and that's all very vague. But so there were some written texts for yoga, but there wasn't really a founder, and it looked an awful lot like calisthenics. And so it didn't get placed into world religions. And as a consequence, we all think of yoga as exercise, like working out, developing our core. We think of it as like going to the gym. Like hot yoga is really popular. because it really pushes you physically. And as Bob said, it's much more of a process. This is something that's transformative, that changes who we are. And this is the approach I began to take to Buddhism. It's not doctrine, it's not understanding, it's not knowledge. It's experiencing something in a ritual context that's transformative. And that's when Buddhism, I think, finally began to touch my heart. That it's in my body. It's not something I'm cognizing in my mind. So when we think of the Buddha, we don't really think of him as a savior, as you would in a world religions context. We think of him as a founder, a guide, or a teacher. And I wanted to share a quote with you from Thich Nhat Hanh. There is a misconception that Buddhism is a religion and that you worship Buddha. Buddhism is a practice like yoga. It's like I paid him to say this. It just fits my talk so well. So I wanted to share some of these types of quotes with you. This is Sharon Salzberg. She's a very famous American Buddhism, in American Buddhism. She said, meditation may be done in silence and stillness, by using voice and sound, or by engaging the body in movement. All forms emphasize the training of attention. So meditation is something very broad. It's a very broad category, and there's lots of different types. But when it comes to religion and Buddhism, most Americans think this is Buddhism. It's a monk, male, sitting silently on a cushion. That this is the beginning and the end, or the ideal of Buddhist practice. And I also wanted to mention, Bob talked about the Eightfold Noble Path. I found this very confusing. Number 7 is mindfulness, and number 8 is meditation. And in our country, we use these words interchangeably, and I'm supposed to explain what we're doing when we meditate. And if somebody asked me, what's the difference, I would say, I went, what? I didn't hear you? Oh, I'm sorry, we're out of time. I've tracked this down a lot, and the best I can tell is that meditation, as Bob explained, tends to be one of focus and of being single-minded, of shutting everything out except the object that you're focusing on. And this tends to be, I think, practical for in a monastic context. But mindfulness, and we actually changed the name of our service from meditation service to mindfulness service, because what we try to do is we sit silently, but it's more of accepting everything as it is, embracing every sound, every expression, every moment, and integrate that into your practice. And so like when you go through the day, mindfulness is something that's portable with you. You just be aware of people that are driving around you. Be aware at the grocery store. When you see somebody smile, don't take cuts without knowing it. This is where privilege comes from too. Most people are privileged and we're not aware of it. We just think we're in charge or we're more important. I was at Hoag Hospital for a doctor's appointment, and there was a man and woman in the elevator with me, and they were talking in Chinese. And I don't speak Chinese, but I speak husband. So she was kind of bawling him out, and I think she was saying, like, you got to take this more seriously. Like, this is important. You know, I want you to live for a long time. So I let him out of the elevator first because I was being mindful. And then we were walking towards the door, and there was this older woman who could barely walk coming down the stairs to come in into the lobby. But I thought to myself, I thought too much. It's an automatic door. It was going to open anyway. So I didn't wait for her. I didn't open the door for her because it's an automatic door. The couple from China both stopped. And he broke the beam, and the door opened, and then he put his hand over the door so he could keep the door open for her because she was so slow. And I thought, oh, I just got killed. I should have done that. So it's just being aware. It's not bad that I didn't do it, but I'm like, that guy is up here in his awareness. I was very impressed. I wanted to shake his hand, but It was too much, too enthusiastic. But it's just, mindfulness is just being aware. Everything's okay. Like equanimity has a lot to do with mindfulness. And then next is our tradition, one of voice and sound. You know, the same thing about doing these different mantras that he talked about. Namo Amida Butsu is an expression of a relationship between the finite self and the infinite, almost like Om. And I asked Reverend Harada, well, what does it mean? What does Namo Amida Butsu mean? What do these characters mean? I want to look these characters up. I want to memorize the meaning. And he told me, I can't tell you what it means. You have to say it long enough until you intuit the meaning of it. And when I heard that, I was like, oh man, I'm in the wrong church. This is very dangerous. This is like a cult. He won't tell me what this thing is I'm supposed to say. That was very suspicious, very suspicious. But he was right? You just say it until it begins to touch your heart. And then on the yoga side, this is actually meditation through movement, through breathing and the body, of being focused. So these are kind of the three ways that we can practice meditation. And it says here that yoga stems from the Vedas, very ancient Hindu texts, the Indian holy texts that were composed from around 1900 before the Common Era. Besides yoga, three major religions came from these texts: Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism. Around 240 of the Common Era, a sage called Patanjali composed the Yoga Sutras. His 8 limbs of yoga still inform practice today and discuss posture, breathing, meditation, and correct living. So Bob talked a lot about how you can mix and match these things. So if you think of it more as sports, rather than Republican, Democrat, or Christian, Jewish, or you think of it in that way, if you think more about it in terms of sports, like you can play pickleball and then go to yoga. It's not a big deal. You're not breaking any rules. And so, you know, this happens all the time. Even in Japan, when it comes to Buddhism, Christianity, and Shintoism, depending on the activity they're doing, they'll go to that branch or that practice. And so if you're starting a new business, you go to the Shinto. If you're getting married, you go to the Christians. If you had somebody die in your family, you go to the Buddhists. And they don't see anything odd about this because it's not doctrinally based, right? It's something that helps you in your life. So I wanted to share this with you. There's something called the matrix model in religion. And what we do, it's called concept matching, is we look for things, and if we can fill those spots, then we're confident we found a religion. And so initially Christianity was used as the model. So you have a founder or a savior like Jesus. You have, and the Christianity column, all these columns are very vague because I only know Buddhism now, but I think it was Jesus. You have teachings, you have texts, and you have organizations or churches. You have the same type of thing with Judaism. I actually had Moses here, and that was incorrect, and I changed it to Abraham. You have Islam, and when it came to Buddhism, they kind of shoehorned us into this model. I mean, there is a guy called the Buddha, there are teachings, there's a ton of texts, and there are different schools that practice different activities. And so, like I've said, for better or for worse, Buddhism was put into the world religion category. So I wanted to share with you some quotes kind of pushing back on some of this. As a religious founder, the Buddha did not claim to be divinely inspired prophet, a personal savior, or a deity incarnate in flesh. Within the framework of his teachings, the Dharma, his special role is that of a teacher who reveals the unique path to deliverance. So that's his role. It's a much different role than Jesus. In the earliest form of teachings, as represented by the Pali Canon, no essential difference divides the goal attained by the Buddha himself from that realized by his disciples. For both the goal is the same, awakening, the liberation of the mind. So this is a journey we go on together in a communal sense. Here, So I'm a mathematician, and I love numbers, and this may be a little shoehorned in as well, but we're used to the three religions of the Middle East, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And in India, they had Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism. And Buddhism, the Buddha often was being asked and answered questions from Jainism or from Hinduism. And when Buddhism enters China, it has to deal with Taoism and Confucianism. And in Japan, Neo-Confucianism and Shintoism. So Buddhism is always getting questions from other faith traditions. And one of the things that I've gone, I used to be asked questions and I didn't know what the answer was. And I thought, I need to study harder, or I need to look things up, or I just felt compelled to find an answer. But I realized that they're the wrong questions for Buddhists. And the Buddha used to do this too. He would not debate. Like if somebody wanted to ask him a sincere, authentic question, he would answer it. But if it was to debate, he would turn it down. So when there's interfaith meetings, I usually turn it down. And the reason why is it's the orientation is completely Christian. And I started to realize that if I can't ask a question, what I try to do is I think, would you ask that of a yoga instructor? Like if you wouldn't ask that of a yoga instructor, why are you asking me this question? So Linda never gets questions about doctrine. Nobody reads the Patanjali Sutras and asks her a doctrinal point. They also never ask her, what is the yoga view on Gaza? Or what's your position on abortion? Or what do you think about the presidential election? She never gets questions like that because it's considered an exercise. But one of the problems in the yoga tradition is that the spirituality sometimes gets drained out of it because we see it as exercise. So it's kind of interesting. I think we kind of have to meet in the middle. Buddhism is seen as something deeply spiritual, but practice isn't really appreciated. And in yoga, practice is greatly appreciated, but it's not really embraced as something that's transformative and a very profound spiritual practice. So everybody has this bumper sticker. These are all the logos I told you about. I've read that this eight-spoked wheel is kind of relatively new to Buddhism and has become our emoji, because like I said, you got to have one. You often hear the phrase that all these religions are saying the same thing, and everybody's on a different path, and we all meet at the top of the mountain. The Dalai Lama said something different, and I thought it was great. He said each one of these traditions have their own mountain they're climbing. And when you get to the top of your mountain, you can look at the other people on their mountain, and you can appreciate their journey. But I really think Buddhism, each religious tradition is focusing on something different. I think Buddhism has a different sensibility to it. It's not trying to answer the same questions, perhaps, that Christianity is. And I would just like Buddhism to be appreciated in its own context. So this is just my personal editorial. It would make me happy. Okay. So I wanted to show this to you. This is a graph of all the Buddhist sects or schools. And the word sect is not a negative term in religious studies. It is on popular media. It almost sounds like a cult. But these are different schools. And here's us right here. This is Jodo Shinshu. And you can follow these red squares all the way back to the historical Buddha. So Buddhism seems super liberal and you can just do whatever you want, but having a lineage that goes back to the historical Buddha really kind of proves your chops or gives you authenticity. So every school wants to do this. My chair is blocking Tibetan Buddhism. It's a little hard to see, but this is Tibetan Buddhism down here. And what's interesting is there's actually 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism, and the Dalai Lama is the head of only one of the 4 schools. So he's not even the head of Tibetan Buddhism. Everybody asks me, is he the Pope of Buddhism? He's not even the Pope of Tibetan Buddhism. So each one of these schools, now this is the interesting part, is the differences is based on practice, not doctrine. So in the Protestant tradition, every time somebody has a quibble, they split. A friend of mine told me it's in their spiritual DNA. Every time something happens, like I think the Methodists just split over gay marriage. I mean, they split over doctrinal things. We split over practice. This is a practice for everyday people. It's non-monastic. This is probably the biggest brand differentiator we have. This is something that can be done by everybody in your everyday life. And that makes this Pure Land branch different from all the other branches. And I think maybe we need to lean into that and really amplify that message. And it's not because you're not good enough to be a monastic, or you don't have the discipline, or you can only do easy things. It's a practice that's designed for this audience. It's not easier or dumbed down or anything like that. It's how can you realize awakening with 2 kids, and I had 3 dogs at my house, and they're putting wood floors on the 2nd level, and I live near, not next door, but near a fire station. Dogs barking. I used to try to meditate at home. It's very difficult. In yoga, Hatha yoga, I checked with Linda, is kind of the umbrella for asanas, breathing techniques, and body positions and meditation. So there must be a lot of other yogas out there that I don't know about that aren't this asana breathing meditation style. But I don't even know what those are. But one thing, Hatha, Ha means sun, and Tha means moon. And we had it's called a Kieshki ceremony, where you can receive a Dharma name. We're going to have one at OCBC in October for our 60th anniversary. So, if you'd love to have a Dharma name, there's an opportunity. It doesn't come along very often. I think this was 2015. Linda chose her first character as the sun to kind of give a nod to yoga. Reverend Harada picks the second character. He picked the moon because that's what Hatha means, sun and moon. But it's in our Sambutsuge. It said the Buddha's wisdom and light, it's the blazing light of the sun, the moon, and the mani jewels. And if you look right here, that's her homeo, Nichigatsu. That's the line from the Sambutsuge. And so my wife, Linda Turner, is Nichigatsu. Yoga and Buddhism. There's yin yoga. This is kind of my favorite. It taught me to give up and stop competing and let the props do the work for you. You could call this other power yoga. So I really like this. I'm very hyper and I was competing with the 30-year-old women. And women tend to be, I don't want to, my daughter will get mad at me. I shouldn't gender, but it seems like women are more flexible than men. So when I went to yin yoga, say you set up the props in this way and you pour your body into the prop like a mold. And the more you don't try, the more benefit it has. And to me, this was like other power practice in our tradition. You're not doing this to achieve anything. And poses is a big problem in yoga as well. People do this pose, they want to nail it, and they want to talk about it, and then they quit. So, chasing a pose, you're turning it into calisthenics. So this was my favorite. I really like this. Kundalini, I like this a lot. Very noisy. I've never been to this, but lots of chanting and singing in Kundalini yoga. So again, everybody agrees, but it's just different practices, and it works for different people. Vinyasa flow, I thought this was pretty hard. You move continually from pose to pose, and I just felt like this was a recipe for injury, and so this would be like pickleball yoga for me. I don't want to do this. I just think I'm going to pop a hamstring or something. Iyengar, maybe nitpicky is not fair, but very precise, precision movements. Ashtanga, I think, is very orchestrated. There's a certain order, there's a certain program, and you kind of could go to different studios and do the same series of poses. And you, like Bob was saying, you might go to different studios and see which ones fit you. This one, I always get restorative mixed up with yin, and I think I even used the same picture. Kind of proved my point, but Linda's explained this to me, and I don't quite get it, but at my level, they're the same. So, if yoga is a practice and not a religion, then the problem is it becomes an exercise. And these are some of the big questions that people are asking. And Linda's friends and the studios Linda's go to, they're very sensitive about wanting yoga to be spiritual and deep and profound. Like one of her friends says, we're not doing calisthenics, this isn't exercise, we're not trying to lose weight. And so some of the questions are, where are all the men? Yoga used to be male-dominated in India, but where are the men? People want to know how many calories did they burn. Linda and I have talked about people have really high expectations and want quick results. And so we have a joke between us that I'll share with you. If anybody ever comes up to Linda or myself and says, oh my God, this is the greatest thing I've ever done. You're the greatest teacher I've ever met. I'm going to come here every day. This has changed my life. We look at each other and we say, we're never going to see that person again. They're gone. The reason why is they're, well, too enthusiastic, but they want a huge change in their life in a matter of weeks. But creating habits takes a long time, and it's effortless. And I know it's really hard to break bad habits, but it's also really easy to create new habits that are good. And so a lot of this practice, learning to breathe, learning to slow down, these are little habits that become ingrained until they become effortless and just part of your being. And so one of the things I think the Buddha did is he's not going to change our stripes. We're not going to become non-habit forming people. So he uses that mechanism that's already there. It's really easy to drink too much. It's really easy to get hooked on cigarettes. It's really easy to get hooked on gambling. It's really easy to get hooked on chocolate. So he's like, why don't I use that? It's really easy to get hooked on breathing or on bowing or on chanting. And so I think that's the mechanism we use. I also wanted to show you these two images. This is yoga as being a contortionist. And it really has nothing to do with being limber or not. And I would say the people that are least limber get the most out of yoga. Because I don't think they're getting, if you can put your leg behind your head and hop around the room, I just don't think you're concentrating. I don't think it doesn't require any focus. And so I think, the more tight you are, and the more you have to focus, and the longer it takes to release those muscles and release your mind, I think the more impact it has. So, it's like in our tradition, the more you realize you're foolish, the more you realize your wisdom. Oh, and I wanted to share this with you. This is from a 98-year-old yoga expert. When I was Googling for this, I found out that she passed away at 99. So I guess her first name is impossible to say, V. Nana Mal, the 90-year-old yoga expert from the southern state of Tamil Nadu, believes that in its truest form, yoga isn't about rigorous activity or getting all sweaty and breathless. It's like relaxation. And this is what she's been practicing for a century. So you could tell I've got like a ton more slides. I've only got 3 more minutes. So I just wanted to share with you that authenticity in practice is very important. If you turn yoga into a means to an end or a competition, it kind of denudes it of its spiritual power. And it was the practice and the path and the just sticking with itness that really helped me appreciate Buddhism. And all these different spiritual traditions coming out of India kind of share this context. This is Indian spirituality. And so I think if you approach Buddhism the way you approach yoga, I think the marriage of the two will help you appreciate Buddhism as practice, as spiritual. And it's really, really to me. I think yoga might have saved me for Buddhism. I finally felt it, and I let go of trying to understand it. And I think that's when my practice began to become authentic. But it takes a long time. And, if you go to, this is another thing. If you go to make your backswing better when you golf, that's super good, because that's a keyhole into this tradition. So as Bob said, these things are good. My back hurts, and it doesn't hurt anymore because I've done yoga. But the side effect was it became spiritual and a deeply profound activity. And I always go to Linda. She teaches off the 55. I go with her every Tuesday. And I think it's really good that I practice, but I have this sneaky suspicion that she wants me to go so she can use the carpool lane. If I don't go, she can't use the carpool lane. So I've learned a lot from my wife and from this yoga tradition, and there's an overlap. And this Creolism, if you don't appropriate and you don't try to market it, I've had other slides, Americans are really good at marketing things and making them banal and making them, I think, available to a mass audience, then you can run into troubles. And there's that joke that Lululemon sells way many yoga clothes than people that actually go to yoga. And I don't know if it was Bob that told me this, but somebody told me they went to an ashram in India and they came to the first practice session in Lululemon, and the guru said, no. It triggered him. And he said, no, you're not wearing the Western Lululemon to the ashram. We're not doing that. And he had to go and get a different outfit. So I think expediency is good, but you don't want to turn it into a commercial product that's available for sale, at 10% off for New Year's. So I want to thank you very much. I'm very proud of my pacing. This is another big deal for me. Thank you very much. Thank you.